Okay, I think we can get started. So I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming today, and welcome to those of you who are coming here for the first time. Welcome to the Indian Institute of World Culture. And I just wanted to start by telling you a little bit about how and why we are doing this event. So this year we are commemorating the birth anniversary of two individuals today. On 8th of October was B.P.WADIA, who was the founder of this institute. And on 10th of October is Shripad Amrit Dange, who had his 125th birth anniversary last year. And so with this, it will really be the culmination of his 125th birth anniversary. And many people might wonder why put Dange and Wadia together. They seem to be so different. And, one of them, Dange, was actually the founder of, one of the founders of the Communist Party of India. B.P. Wadia, as I said, was a theosophist. He was the founder of this institute. And my response to that is just that I think we should not make assumptions about historical personalities. We should not classify them with small labels, but rather we should try and understand them, try and read them, and try and study them. I think that there are many reasons why the two of them actually do belong together. First of all, they were both part of our freedom struggle. They were both, in fact, admirers of Gandhiji. Both of them have writings speaking about how they admired Gandhiji. And then the reason that we are here, they were both very involved in the labor movement in India. And whereas B.P. Wadia was the founder of one of the first trade unions in India, in Madras, Dange is really known as one of our really historically leading trade unionists in the country, who started the Girni Kamgar Union in Bombay and was really the biggest trade unionist for a long period of time in the Bombay textile mills. I was reading up in preparation, I was reading what B.P. Wadia has written on labor, and he has this pamphlet or small book on labor in Madras, which he published in 1935. In that he says that we cannot take this question of labor in India, we cannot address it in old ways. We really need a new approach, a new orientation, he calls it. And I'll just quote from him. He says, what we need, and this is Wadia, is the abolition of every vestige of slavery, of any kind whatever, from the body politic of the system as a whole, which tarnishes the life of labor. The introduction of proper and adequate safeguards for the control of production and of produce, economically and organically. The full but also the only legitimate recognition of capital by a deprivation of its power to exploit labor and to accumulate profits. And so here we have statements that I think Dange would very much have agreed with. And in fact, he is known, for those who don't know, Dange is known for his slogan, unity and struggle. And I remember that when we were doing an event in Delhi, there was somebody from, a worker from Haryana who explained to me that what it meant was that you struggle for your rights, but you are united in national development. And so that, that twin of unity and struggle is really something that Dange theorized and talked about. And then, why here at World Culture? Why do this is a cultural space? And I think, the original vision of this institute has always been to encourage the true cosmopolitan spirit, to discuss ideas, and to discuss ideas not in an academic way, but discuss ideas in a way that ordinary people can participate in it. And Wadia also said, without the masses, there can be no true democracy. And I think that is what we need today, mass participation in the spiritual, ideological, political life of our country. So with that view, we decided to do this event. And of course, initially we had titled it Indian Industrialization and a New World Order. Professor RoyChowdhury said that she didn't like that title, it was too economistic. And the way we were thinking about it was that here we are in a changing world order. The US, which promoted all of these free markets, is now doing protectionism, is imposing tariffs, is asking us to open up our markets. You know, on the other hand, you have this huge rise of China and its industrialization. And what does all of that mean for us? We are really at a crossroads at our country. But she said that, you know, she is a political scientist, and so she will speak about working people. And it is true, I think, that we need for any democracy is not just about elections. I mean, elections are an important part of democracy, but ultimately democracy, as Wadia and Dange understood it, is that the masses should participate in the life of the ideas in the country, and I think that's the vision with which we want to organize this and future events. So I'll just introduce our speaker today and the chair for our session. And you know, many people, as we were just discussing, many people know Bangalore as the IT city, but really in many ways it's a garment city, as I'm sure we'll find out more about today. And in that sense, it's really a tribute to these two figures, Wadia and Dange, who were both part of, really in their labor movement, they were part of the textile mill movement, you know, the struggles in the textile mills. So our chair today, Dr. Prathibha R, is the president of the Garment and Textile Workers Union in Bangalore. She was a garment worker herself, but then she has not only participated in the union to strengthen labor laws, to improve working conditions, but has also recently done, I think, a PhD in on the question of women in the garment industry. And our speaker, Professor Supriya RoyChowdhury, is a professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies. She, as I said, has studied political science and in particular the textile industry for a long time, including in various states of India, and including Maharashtra. And she has also studied really Bangalore for a long time and the textile industry in Bangalore, and has written a book called City of Shadows, Slums and Informal Work in Bangalore. So with that introduction, I would like to invite them both on the stage. So please join us. So we'll start, or we'll do the token. Okay, so I think we just want to start by giving you a token of gratitude for your presence here on behalf of the Institute of World Culture. So I'll ask Rakli Venkatesh. It's better from here. Okay, so now I'll ask Professor RoyChowdhury to address the gathering and make her remarks.
so 30 minutes or less? Yes? 30?
As much time as you want for the discussion.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me here, and particularly grateful to Dr. Raju for initiating the discussion with me on, and being very cooperative about changing the topic to some extent. I'm also really happy to be in this space for this reason that I came to Bangalore in the early 1990s, and through the 90s until about the middle of the 2000s, discussions on labor, workers' movements, social movements, criticisms of neoliberalism, etc., were quite many in the city. I was invited to participate in many forums, in many different spaces. And there were, typically there were institutions sort of scattered all over the city for these kinds of discussions and debates, which seem to have completely dried up now, and the academic civil society debates now seem to be, like at the peak of it all is the Bangalore International Center. I'm not at all criticizing the Bangalore International Center. Really like going there. It serves a great purpose. But all I'm saying is that, the horizontal spread of, spaces for activism to bring together academics, civil society, trade unionists, political parties, etc., which was so vibrant at that time, is just not there anymore. It's a possibility that I am not invited, but I think it's kind of dried up. And I'm so happy to be here, amongst other reasons, to have Prathibha as my chair. We've been friends for many, many years, and we travel on sort of parallel roads, but with the same objective, that is to understand the export-oriented garment industry in Karnataka. So all in all, I start with a really good feeling about this, to share space with Prathibha particularly. And I'm absolutely delighted to be given a chance to pay my personal tribute to S.A.DANGE. Part of my PhD thesis was on the textile industry in Maharashtra. And I was doing fieldwork in Bombay, as it was then called, in the 90s, when S.A.DANGE was no longer alive, but his name was a vibrant presence in the industry to all who I spoke to. And he actually wrote the first report on the rights of textile workers, which anyone who studies the textile industry in India, for us, it's like a Bible, almost. Dange, as Raju mentioned, was one of the founders of the CPI, and he was a typical politician of those times. He joined the nationalist movement with Gandhi, but he later turned to the leftist organizations. And his long political career, he had 13 years as a political prisoner, and particularly the last few decades were marked by many vicissitudes. And unfortunately, towards the end, he actually had to leave the CPI, of which he was the founder and one of the most foremost leaders. But leaving those things aside, he stands out certainly as a socialist leader. And for me, really, what is represented through Dange's life is his turn from Gandhianism to Marxism is important, but also that he actually represented the quintessential left politician of those times, moving very effectively between the trade union movement and the political party, that is the Communist Party of India. of which he was a leader, but he was also the foremost founder of the trade union movement in the Maharashtra textile industry before he formed the CPI. And in fact, two of his successful elections to the Lok Sabha as from the Bombay Central constituency was the direct effect of his work amongst textile workers. Why is this important? Because this movement from trade unionism to political parties is something which seems to have almost disappeared from our political world today. Because political party leaders can no longer think of the working class as a constituency. So they must speak to wider audiences, and in the process, any discourse or narrative on the working class is obviously dissolved to a great extent. So we don't really have the construction or the political construction of a working class narrative. All of us are trying, academics, trade unionists, politicians on the ground, but if you look at national politics, the level of the nation, there isn't a working class narrative anymore. So on their part, this vacuum has also affected trade unions, because trade unions speak for a smaller constituency now, that is the organized working class. And they don't therefore have a political platform on which they can stand. And many trade unions have actually moved perforce from being ideologically inspired organizations to very professional organizations who are pursuing very specific, limited objectives within the framework of workers' rights. But as things are, the platform from which they are speaking gives them no scope to talk about the larger working class as such, So it is, the trade union movement is localized in space and time. So this brings me to the topic which Dr. Raju gave me, that is industrialization in India and the future of the working class. And I think one has to remind oneself of the deceleration of the communist movement, which can be a starting point actually for looking at the process of industrialization in India. As of the 2024 elections, the parliamentary seats for both the CPI and the CPM have been reduced to, I think, 2 and 4 respectively. And there has been a steady deceleration of this. If this is a reflection of, what is happening to the two major communist parties. Of course, there are others. There is a groundswell of ideology and activism inspired by socialist ideas, but we're not going into that. We're looking at, more national figures. So in that sense, if you look at the performance of the CPI and the CPIM, they are not any more national players. Historically, communist or leftist parties have been closely aligned to industrial working classes through a network of trade unions. That has been the historical pattern. So one way of looking at the deceleration of the communist parties and at the decline of leftist ideas and ideologies in India is to look at what has happened to the industrial class itself. And what I will do is to sort of go back and forth between industrial policy, industrialization on the one hand, and what has happened to the industrial working class on the other hand. So again, historically and borrowing from the experience of industrially developed countries, the genesis of the modern industrial class happens through the transfers of large numbers of people from farms to factories. And in economics, this is known as structural transformation. That is the shift from farms to factories, from country or rural areas to urban areas, from informal work to formal work. This is the standard trajectory that the developed countries have followed, and even late developers like Japan, South Korea, etc., East Asian development has followed this trajectory. Now, in India, it's a very stark and staring feature of our development is that this expected transfer from agriculture to industry has not really happened from farm to factory. And what we find instead is that since economic liberalization, there is a growth, there is fast growth in GDP, there is industrial development, there is a lot of wealth generation. We are going to be the third largest economy very soon. We are going to be the economic powerhouse of the future. However, one needs to remind oneself again and again that the largest number of working people are still in the agricultural sector. And this, despite the fact that agriculture's share in GDP has declined systematically, it is now only 14%. There are successive agrarian crises, as reflected in rural indebtedness, farmers' suicides, lack of public investment and in agriculture, and very low and very slow development of large swaths of the country's rural areas. And despite all this, about 44 to 46% of the working population is still employed in agriculture. Now, it is expected that in the course of development, industry's share in GDP will exceed that of agriculture because of, more higher productivity. And this has actually happened in India. So industry's share in GDP is 25% as compared to agriculture's 14%. But the percentage of people who find employment in industry is actually very low. It is 25%, but if you leave out the construction sector and you look only at manufacturing, construction is non-manufacturing, if you look only at manufacturing, then it is only 11%. And there have been, steady declines in the number of people who can find jobs in the manufacturing sector, particularly in organized manufacturing. On the other hand, there is, of course, the service sector, and service sector now leads development and economic growth, which we all know. 55% of GDP is accounted for by the service sector. But the growth of employment in services has been quite low in proportion to that. It is now only 31%, having risen from like 23% in 2013. So there is obviously a great disjuncture between output and generation of employment. Now, in 2009, when the first urban poverty report came out, one of our leading economists, S.A. Hashim, said that, why agriculture continues to harbor large numbers of people, despite the fact that it does not have the space to do so, is a very complex problem. But it is obviously related to the kind of urban and industrial development that has happened in cities. And so we therefore need to look at what the service sector offers. The service sector offers highly paid jobs to technically qualified people. And there has been a spillover into other service sectors like hospitality, maintenance, security, housekeeping, so on and so forth. There's been a huge boom in employment in all of these sectors. But these jobs are all typically unprotected and unregulated. They hover around the minimum wage. There is no security of tenure. So the attraction of those in rural areas seeking jobs in urban areas for the service sector is actually very limited, which is part of the reason why we are not seeing a major transfer of population, of the job-seeking population, from rural to urban areas. But mainly what I wanted to emphasize was that in the process of economic growth and development, typically large numbers of unskilled or even semi-skilled labor look for factory jobs. And that is where the Indian economy has, to a certain extent, failed these job seekers. If you look at, there are a large number of surveys, and I'm not going to talk about those surveys, but just taking one particular survey, the Enterprises and Establishment Survey, during the period 2017-18 to 2022-23, the loss of jobs in manufacturing was in the order of 4 million. Now, there are different accounts, varying accounts of this, but this is one account. So the policy response to this seeming crisis, in jobs, has been the governments have come up again and again with industrial policies with a focus on creating employment. So when the UPA government was there, we had the National Manufacturing Policy of 2011, which aimed to create 100 million jobs in the sector by 2022. It didn't happen. The NDA government, as we all know, has this paradigm of Make in India, so on and so forth. Very recently, in 2025, the National Manufacturing Mission has re-emphasized the goal of boosting the sector with a projected outlay of almost 200 lakh crores in sectors like automobiles, electronics, pharmaceuticals, so on and so forth. Now, making policy is one thing, and policies, as we know, are often driven by political imperatives, often is a reaction or a response to data coming out on joblessness, so on and so forth. But as distinguished from policies, there is the question of a policy paradigm. And I want to emphasize that the overall policy paradigm post-economic liberalization continues to be marked by features which are not necessarily conducive to creating jobs in the organized factory sector. So economic liberalization, as some of you may know, is widely discussed, and I'm not going to go into that. But essentially, liberalization, which came in the 1990s, meant that the state was withdrawing from its role as leading industrial development through large public sectors and would increasingly depend on private capital as the driver of investment in the industrialization project. So, excuse me 1 minute, I'll get my water. So if private capital was to become the main driver of industrial development, the state facilitated both domestic and foreign direct investment. And the overall aim was to make Indian industry competitive at the global level. And if this was the aim, that is globally competitive industry, obviously the shift to capital-intensive and technology-intensive industrialization rather than labor-intensive was the way to go. And one can see the reflection of these in particular policies. So every policy is accompanied by an announcement that it will lead to greater employment. But when you see what is happening to specific sectors, it's a different story. For example, automobiles. And in automobiles particularly, we have come a long way since, since the days of the Ambassador car. Some of you may be familiar with the Ambassador car, the very slow and sleepy Ambassador, which was in the streets 60s, 70s, even 1980s. We now produce cars with foreign collaboration for the export market. And the rough edge of this global competitiveness, particularly in automobiles and in automotive parts, is automation, higher technologies, and loss of jobs. It has struck the automobile industry in a very big way. So what I'm saying is that policies is one thing, but the policy paradigm is another thing, and it affects particular sectors in a similar way. Now, coming then to what are more specific policies relating to employment, we do have an increasing focus on global supply chains, and the National Logistics Policy of 2022 and the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative of 2021 have all played a key role in the emergence of production of supply chains. I'm just assuming that most people would know what is a supply chain. Within this framework of global supply chains, the ready-made garment industry has a distinctive place because it is labor-intensive. So in a context where jobs are disappearing because of automation, because of increasing capital intensity and knowledge and technology intensity, the ready-made garments export industry connected to global players, large global companies, multinational companies, which have invested in India for the production of ready-made garments, stands out because it is offering employment to unskilled, semi-skilled job seekers, and particularly to women. And many of the women employed in this sector are, rural, semi-rural, unskilled women with barely high school education who are looking for employment because their sources of income in the agricultural sector have almost dried up. Now, we have been studying the ready-made garment industry, particularly in Karnataka, for many years through successive surveys, and we have found low wages, very harsh working conditions, and Prathibha will bear me out on this. There is some social insurance, but there is no tenurial security. There is no written job contract, and loss of jobs can happen anytime. This we're talking about 4 to 5 lakh women, right, employed in the garment sector in Bangalore. Now, these features have become the main instrument in the hands of management and shop floor supervisors in garment factories in Bangalore, who use coercion as an instrument of production. You apply coercion in order to force the women to produce more. And also, and importantly, use the absence of tenure as the ultimate weapon. So one of the most frequently quoted things amongst our women respondents was that they are told almost on a daily basis, if you can't handle the work, if you don't like the atmosphere, you can leave today. If you don't like the job, you can leave today. Because obviously for the industry, an unskilled workforce is waiting at the gates to be taken in. So these women are entirely replaceable. What happens in the process is that this is a sector which is hugely a foreign exchange earner. And as you said, that Bangalore is not only an IT city, it is also a garment city. The presence of the garment industry is overshadowed by IT, but it is a huge presence in terms of, physically they occupy a lot of space, and they are power holders in terms of giving employment to so many women. They are also very valued in the eyes of the state as major foreign exchange earners. However, in terms of the workforce, what they have created is a footloose workforce who move in and out of the industry or in and out of different factories in the industry itself in search of better working conditions, or even in search of 500 rupees more if another factory or another sector pays, they move out. We found that the only options actually for garment sector workers is domestic work, which is not much better, but many move out to domestic service because it offers them a more relaxed way of making less money. So this footloose workforce actually offers a very fragile and unstable basis on which to organize trade union activities. And this is also a workforce which, because of very low salaries, we found that after working for 15 years, women are getting as low as 10,000 or 12,000 per month. So there is no savings, there is a lot of indebtedness. So we found that after retirement, a large majority of the women are forced to go back to their rural areas. And so this industry, in a sense, questions the whole idea of urbanization, because what is happening is that through foreign investment in garment exports, these women are brought out of rural and semi-rural areas to provide labor for this highly profit-making industry, but at the end of the whole process, they have really nothing much to fall back on, and they must go back to their rural homes. So actually this reverse migration, which is happening at a very large scale, is not noticed that much, has not been studied that much, but it is an important question mark to the model of urbanization that we are following, which is actually a very, very limited model. Now, another important policy intervention came in the form of the Skill India policy. Both the UPA government and the NDA government have come up with skilling policies or Skill India missions. So the thought behind the skills policy was that there is no match between the kind of jobs that are available and the skilled labor and the unskilled labor which is there. And so let's skill them in order to provide a meeting point between jobs and the job-seeking population. The Skill India policy actually skirted the fact that there are no jobs and therefore focused on providing skills without providing jobs. So skills or skill training institutions, provide skill training in diverse fields like driving, beauty and wellness, security guards, housekeeping, basic computer skills, basic English, so on and so forth. We did a study of the skills policy and its impact in Karnataka in 2019, and if you're interested, you could take a look at it. But our major finding was that most young people or job seekers are looking for office jobs. They have high school degrees, some even have graduate degrees. They are obviously looking for office jobs. At the end of their skills training, which may be for 3 months to 1 year, they get jobs only in malls or supermarkets or in other retail, or as drivers, or in very low-level beauty parlors in small neighborhoods. The income is so low that they can hardly sustain their lives. Many go back to rural areas from where they have come. Many hop from job to job. So again, it's the creation of a very unstable workforce, and obviously has not really worked. Now, the most important feature, and I'm coming towards the end of my talk, and the most important feature of urban employment currently is that most of it is in the informal sector. So large private corporations, the larger industries in the private sector, or large public sectors do offer regular permanent jobs, but even they have shifted much of their employment from regular jobs to contract employment. So contract workers are in the hierarchy of workers. They occupy a lower place than regular workers. And other than the large public and private sectors, there is a whole range of units and enterprises where there is no formal employment, as in the garment sector. So in the garment sector, particularly, is what we call the informal in the formal, because this is factory employment. There is a salaried wage, there is some social insurance, but as I have tried to explain, the basic parameters of formal employment are not there, and this particular sector bears even being part of the organized sector, bears some of the classic features of informal employment. So coming to the question of, how do you represent workers' rights? Or who represents workers' rights? So in terms of a collective voice or collective organization, the problems which face trade unions is the shrinking of the organized sector. So to mobilize and organize informal workers presents one of the most difficult and challenging tasks for trade unionists, because workers who do not have permanent or regular jobs fear termination if they engage with trade unions or in trade union activities. So there is low level of, unionization in most sectors today. There is also disconnect at the local level. Local level trade unions are disconnected from larger national trade union federations. And one could say that the structure of the workforce has changed so significantly that large numbers of workers are not really available for mobilization in the way in which they were available up until the 1980s perhaps. And one interesting thing is that as the paradigm of development is changed, so actually has the character of the working class. One thinks of the aspirational class. We're all the time talking about the aspirational class. One thinks of the aspirational class as the middle class, but in fact, it is the working poor who are the aspirational class. Those who live in urban areas, who barely earn the minimum wage, but who are struggling to put their children through English medium schools, coaching centers, and many of these households are enticed by the constant stimulation to consumption provided by malls and mobiles, and they have stepped out of the working class narrative to aspire for middle class status. You can see them, in a sense, running on the same spot because they are unable to improve their socioeconomic status over a lifetime. What is also important, they are unable to improve their mobility intergenerationally. Very recently, we've done a study of children of garment workers. We found that most are unable to make it through high school. Many drop out or not, they join again the informal sector in the services sector with very low salaries. So the question of, aspirations leading to economic and social mobility is almost not there, as you see this intergenerational class, in a sense, stuck in the same place. In terms of governance, there is, of course, states and governments have responded with a whole range of welfare measures. So you get free rations, free bus passes, free electricity, cash transfers to women, old age, widow pensions, so on and so forth. Every government in every state has come up, and almost competitively, with these welfare measures. And in a sense, what these have done, these welfare provisions or social policies, is to dull, the sense of want, because you're getting some things. If you're ill, the government is actually footing the bill for your surgery. So in the process of this dulling, what has happened is that the question of work, employment, livelihood, and income has even more receded into the background for the working class itself. So the demand is not for work and more income. The demand or the expectation and the claim is for social policies. And I just want to mention that where the working class is concerned, we are, used to thinking of the working class as the salaried wage earners. In India, actually 54% of the working class are self-employed. And self-employment this makes a lot of sense, because if largest portion of workers are in rural areas, agriculture, dairy, livestock, these are all self-employed activities. So it makes a lot of sense that much of employment is self-employment rather than salaried. However, in urban areas, about 60% of the workforce are self-employed, and these are, very small units which are called own account units, which are run by one person without any hired help, or run by a person, the owner, with family labor, which is unpaid labor. So the fact of the matter is that the working class is spread over this large group of self-employed persons and over the salaried class, which are getting barely a minimum wage and who have no protection of, social protection or job protection. So looking at this vast numbers of vulnerable people, one could say that the working class seems to be a class without a future. Because where does one find ways or a window even to talk about substantive social and economic mobility in a situation where collective organization is difficult and where state policies are responding only very peripherally to working class needs? But I would just like to leave you not with such a pessimistic reading of all of this, but to say that the future possibly lies in organizations like the GATFU, of which the chair is a member. And I have seen these kinds of grassroots trade unions struggling for over 3 decades in Bangalore and in other states, where really the script is written against them, but the struggle is very real, very significant. And in the struggle, one can actually see the, the opposed binaries of capital and labor working out. Not just that, the challenge is often put forward by these trade unions to the state, because the state is a major stakeholder in industries like the garment industry. So they're negotiating not only with capital, that is the owners of the factories, but also in a very substantive way with the state, which is an important creator and participant in the minimum wage board. The state stands in for regulation or the lack of regulation, so on and so forth. So these struggles which these unions, the unions like the GATFU, the Garment Labor Union, and various other unions of this genre in different parts of the country, the struggles of these unions signify to us that actually the struggle is still on. What seems to be an area of darkness is actually an area of light, because the struggle continues in a very significant way, and unions like the GATFU have actually been able to pull up the minimum wage through successive minimum wage board decisions. So I want to end this by going back to one of the lines which I read from a text of S.A.DANGE, which is that when we think of labor, we have to think not only of the yesterday and of the today, but we have to think of the tomorrow. To think significantly of the tomorrow in India's larger framework of industrialization and of the working class, I think there are 2 points which stand out. One is that the state is obviously pursuing a model of economic growth which is based on the growth of the services sector. And one of the main questions which needs to be asked is, can the services sector lead development where the largest number of job seekers are unskilled or semi-skilled? And if indeed the service sector is leading economic growth, then what kind of regulations does the state need to put forward in order to protect those who are employed in the services sector? That's one important question. The other important question is, can the state, in a democratic framework, be persuaded or perhaps even forced to provide a more substantive, a stronger regulatory framework as far as industry is concerned, or as far as the services are concerned? In 2016, quite a long time back, we had done a study of the labor regulatory mechanism in Karnataka, and we actually found that regulators, that is inspectors, once they retire, their positions are not filled, and a large number of labor inspectors have actually been channeled into other kinds of activities. You know, they register workers, they do welfare work, they do so on and so forth, but they are not going into factories, which is what they're supposed to do, in order to find out what kind of, rules and laws, labor laws, are being obeyed or not obeyed. So the profile of the state as a regulatory mechanism is something that has kind of been thrown out of the state's agenda. So on many of these points, whether we're looking at the service sector or whether we're looking at the governance system, the labor governance system, there is enormous scope for activism to work itself out, because we cannot at the same time be talking about macro policies. Macro policies are not framed at the local level. Macro policies are framed in New Delhi, where larger economic interests are driving policy. These interests are international. These are large economic and interests of industrialists who are deeply vested in a globally competitive economic policy regime. So those are not changes that, local trade unions or even academics like us can be talking about, but we can certainly be talking about changes at these micro levels where pressure can be brought about on states to provide for a more supportive regulatory regime within the framework that exists. I think I'll stop now. Should I wait for questions here or? Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much, Professor RoyChowdhury. And now I'll ask our chair today, Dr. Prathibha, to make her remarks, and then we'll have an open discussion.
ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಸುಪ್ರಿಯಾ ರಾಯಚೌಧರಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಇದನ್ನು ಇಷ್ಟು ವಿದ್ವತ್ಪೂರ್ಣವಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದೆ ಇಟ್ಟಿರೋದಕ್ಕೆ. ಇವತ್ತು ಈ ಒಂದು ವೇದಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥ ರಾಜೀವ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಾನು ವಂದಿಸ್ತಾ, ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಒಂದು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಎರಡು ಮಹಾನ್ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿತ್ವಗಳ ಒಂದು ನೆನಪಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋವಂಥ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದು ನಾನು ನನ್ನ ಒಂದೆರಡು ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಹೇಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಂಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆ ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂತೋಷ ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರಿಗಾಗಿ ದುಡಿದಂಥ ಜೀವಗಳು ಇವತ್ತು ನಾವು ಒಂದು ಚರ್ಚೆಯನ್ನು ಏರ್ಪಡಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಭವಿಷ್ಯ ಮುಂದೆ ಏನಾಗ್ಬೋದು ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಸುಮಾರು 400 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಸುಮಾರು ಒಂದು 100 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಈ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಹಾಗೆ ಮುಂದುವರಿತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನಮಗೆ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಹೆಂಗಿದೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೋತೀನಿ. ನಾನು ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆನೇ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕಾ ಅಂತ ಅಂದರೆ, ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ನ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಾವು ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಸಿಚುಯೇಷನ್ನ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೋದಾ ಅಂತಲೂ ಒಂದು ಸರಿ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಒಂದು ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ 1990 ಆದಮೇಲೆ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಯಿತು, ಆರ್ಗನೈಸಿಂಗ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಫುಲ್ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಯಿತು. ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಎಲ್ಲೂ ಹೊಸ ಜಾಬ್ ಆಪರ್ಚುನಿಟೀಸ್ ಆಗಲಿ ರಿಕ್ರೂಟ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆದ್ರೂ ಕೆಲಸ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ. ಹೇಗೆ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಅಂದರೆ ಸುಪ್ರಿಯಾ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಅಸಂಘಟಿತ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನು ಆದಷ್ಟು ನೀನೇನೂ ಅಲ್ಲ, ನಿನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಶ್ರಮಶಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನೀನು ಕೊಟ್ಟಷ್ಟು ದುಡ್ಡಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಿನಗಿಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟೇಕ್ ಅಂತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೀನು ಏನು ಸಮಭಾಗಿ ಏನಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಇದರೊಳಗಡೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಮೊನ್ನೆ ನಿಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಇರೋಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ನಾನು ತುಂಬ ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದರೆ GR ಅಂತವ್ರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಮುರಳೀಧರ್ ಅವ್ರು ಅಂತ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರ ಮುಂದೆ ನಾನು ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾತಾಡೋಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡೋಳೇನಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಎಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ. ವಿಸ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಕಂಪ್ನಿನಲ್ಲಿ 8,000 ಜನ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ರೆ ಕೇವಲ ಒಂದು 600-700 ಜನ ಪರ್ಮನೆಂಟ್ ವರ್ಕರು, ಇನ್ನು ಮಿಕ್ದವರೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸು. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೆಲಮಂಗಲದ ಹತ್ರ ಒಂದು ಯಜಾಕಿ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಇದೆ, ಅದೇನೋ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನಿಕ್ ಇದು ರೆಡಿ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ 200 ಜನ ಮಾತ್ರ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಪರ್ಮನೆಂಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸು, 800 ಜನ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್. ಇಲ್ಲಿಂದನೇ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗುತ್ತೆ ನಮಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ ಹಿಂಗೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತನ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಇದೆಲ್ಲದನ್ನೂ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ ನಾವು ಪರ್ಮನೆಂಟಾಗಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೊಂದಷ್ಟು ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳು ಸವಲತ್ತುಗಳು, ಅವರು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸೆಟಲ್ ಆಗ್ತಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಆಟೋಮೆಟಿಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋವಂಥ ಒಂದು ಓನರ್ಶಿಪ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಬೇಸ್ ವರ್ಕ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಕಾನೂನುಗಳು ಇವಾಗ ಏನು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗಿದೆಯೋ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಸಂಹಿತೆಗಳು ಅದನ್ನೂ ಕೊಡುಗೆಗಳನ್ನ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಫಿಕ್ಸ್ ಟರ್ಮ್ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ತೊಗೊಂಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಇರೋ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಕಾನೂನುಗಳನ್ನ ಅವ್ರಿಗಿರೋ ಅಂಥ ಸವಲತ್ತುಗಳನ್ನ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಮುಂಚೆ ಆದರೆ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಮುಚ್ಚಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ 100 ಜನ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನೀವು ಹೋಗಿ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು ಸರ್ಕಾರದಲ್ಲಿ. ಈಗ 300ಕ್ಕೆ ಏರಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು. ಅಂದರೆ 299 ಜನ ಇದ್ರೂ ಸಹ ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ರು ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೂ ಆ ಕಾರ್ಖಾನೆನ ಯಾರಿಗೂ ಕೇಳದೆ ಮುಚ್ಬೋದು. ಪರಿಹಾರ ಕೊಡುವಂಥ ಏನು ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಪ್ರತಿಭಟನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ಏನಿತ್ತು, ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಏನಾದರೂ ಪ್ರತಿಭಟನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಅವರು ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಅಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳನ್ನ ಅಥವಾ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಧಾನಾಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳ ಹತ್ರ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರಿಗೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅದೊಂದು ಸವಲತ್ತಿತ್ತು, ಏನಂತಂದರೆ ಯಥಾಸ್ಥಿತಿಯನ್ನು ಕಾಪಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು, ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಯಾರನ್ನೂ ಕೆಲಸದಿಂದ ತೆಗಿಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ಇತ್ತು, ಸ್ಟೇಟಸ್ ಕೋ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಇವಾಗ ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಲೀಕರಿಗೂ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಡ್ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವತ್ತೇನಾದ್ರೂ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ನೋಟಿಸ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ನಾವು ಮುಷ್ಕರ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಮಾಲೀಕರು ಸಂಧಾನಾಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳ ಹತ್ರ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು, ಸ್ಟೇಟಸ್ ಕೋ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಸೊ ಅವಾಗ ಸ್ಟೇಟಸ್ ಕೋ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನೀವು ಮುಷ್ಕರ ಮಾಡೋ ಹಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಸೊ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇರುವಾಗ ನಾನು ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಇವೆಲ್ಲದನ್ನು ಹೇಗೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಒಂದು ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆಗಳನ್ನ, ಅವರ ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳನ್ನ ಹೇಗೆ ಶ್ರಿಂಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ವಿಷಯಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಸುಪ್ರಿಯಾ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ತುಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಅಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸುಮಾರು ಒಂದು 4-5 ಲಕ್ಷ ಜನ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಟೋಟಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ 35-40 ಲಕ್ಷ ಜನ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಒಂದು NCR ರೀಜನ್ನು, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಹರಿಯಾಣ ಮತ್ತು ಗುಡ್ಗಾಂವ್ ಇದರೊಳಗಡೆ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ತಿರುಪೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿ. ಮೂರೂ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಉದ್ಯಮ. ಅಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ತಿರುಪೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೀ ನಿಟ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. NCR ರೀಜನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಥರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ತುಂಬ ಓವನ್ನು ಮತ್ತು ಕಾಟನ್ ಮತ್ತು ಸಿಲ್ಕ್ಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಹೆಸರುವಾಸಿ. ಇದು ನಾನು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ಡೊಮೆಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ಗೆ ಹೊಲಿಯುವಂಥ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಇವರು 100% ಅಂತಾರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಯ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟು. ಇವ್ರು ಹೊಲಿಯೋದು ಯಾವುದೂ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾರಾಟ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾರಾಟ ಆಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೂ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೈಸ್ ಟಿಕೆಟ್ ಹಾಕಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಬಂದು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾರಾಟ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅದು ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ಹೊಲಿತಾರೆ. ಈ ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿರೋರು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಇದು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಇದು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಗ್ಲೋಬಲ್ ಸಪ್ಲೈ ಚೈನ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಅವರು. ಲೋಕಲ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸು, ಅಂತಾರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಯ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳು, ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಪ್ಲೈಯರ್ಸು ಅಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿಗಳು. ಈ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಇವ್ರು ಆರ್ಡರ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಮಾತ್ರನೇ ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೆಲಸ. ಸೊ ಇದು ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಸಂಘಟಿತ ಉದ್ಯಮ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಇವ್ರು ಯಾರೂ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ವೇತನ ಒಪ್ಪಂದ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಪರ್ಮನೆಂಟೇ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಇದರೊಳಗೆ ತೊಗೊಂತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಕಾನೂನು ಪ್ರಕಾರವಾಗಿ ಅವ್ರು ಪರ್ಮನೆಂಟು. ಆದರೆ ಒಂದು ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿರುವಂಥ ಫೀಚರ್ ಏನು, ಲಕ್ಷಣ ಏನು ಈ ಇಡೀ ಸಪ್ಲೈ ಚೈನ್ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಫೂಟ್ ಲೂಸ್ ಅಂತ. ಫೂಟ್ ಲೂಸು ಬರೀ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ಗಲ್ಲ, ಈವನ್ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಫೂಟ್ ಲೂಸ್, ಅವ್ರ ಸಪ್ಲೈಯರ್ಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಫೂಟ್ ಲೂಸ್. ಯಾಕಂತಂದರೆ ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ನಾವೊಂದು 30 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ. ಎಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಒಗ್ಗೂಡಕ್ಕೆ ಟ್ರೈ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೋ ಅಥವಾ ಒಗ್ಗೂಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೇನಾದ್ರು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ನಿಧಾನಕ್ಕೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ವ್ಯಾನಿಷ್ ಔಟ್ ಆಗಿಬಿಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಕಣ್ಣು ಚಿತ್ರ ಆಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟು ಅಂದರೆ ಸಪ್ಲೈಯರ್ಸ್ ಏನಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿಯವರು, ಅವರು ಒಂಚೂರು ಏನಾದ್ರೂ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಒಂದೇ ರಾತ್ರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ರಾತ್ರೋರಾತ್ರಿ ಎತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಮೆಷಿನರಿನ ಎತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಇದು ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ದೊಡ್ಡ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಮೆಷಿನ್ಗಳಿರ್ತವೆ, ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ರಾತ್ರೋರಾತ್ರಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಾಕ್ಸೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಇಲ್ಲೇನಿಲ್ಲ, ಮೆಷಿನ್ಗಳು ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ, ಆರಾಮಾಗಿ ಒಂದು ಲಾರಿ ತೊಗೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಡ್ಬೋದು. ಸೊ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಮಾತ್ರ ಫೂಟ್ ಲೂಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಈ ಫೂಟ್ ಲೂಸ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದನೇ ಇಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿದೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರವರೆಗೂ ಅಂತ ನನಗೆ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ನಾನು ಇಡೀ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯ ಒಂದು ಚಿತ್ರಣವನ್ನು 2 ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗಳಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಹೇಳಿ ನಾನು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮಾತಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಒಂದು ಫ್ಯೂಚರ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಇದರೊಳಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೋದು ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು. ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನ ನಾವು 2007ರಿಂದ ಹೊಡೆದಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ, ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟೈಲ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಯೂನಿಯನ್. ಯಾರ ಜೊತೆ ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನನೇ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕಲೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಬಾರ್ಗೇನಿಂಗ್ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟಿಂದ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಈ ಇಡೀ ಸಪ್ಲೈ ಚೈನಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಗೆ ಇರೋವಂಥ ಒಂದು ಅಧಿಕಾರ, ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಏನು ಮಾನಿಟ್ರಿ ಬೆನಿಫಿಟ್ ಕೊಡೋವಂಥ ಅಧಿಕಾರ ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಲಾಭನೂ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳು ತಗೊಳ್ತವೆ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಲಾಭ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಸುಮಾರು ಒಂದು 100 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ವ್ಯವಹಾರ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ 75 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ತಗೊಳ್ತವೆ, 25 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಮಾತ್ರನೇ ನಮ್ಮ ಮ್ಯಾನುಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಚರರ್ಗೆ ಬರೋದು, ಸಪ್ಲೈಯರ್ಸ್ಗೆ. ಅದರೊಳಗಡೆ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಲೇಬರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟು 1 ರೂಪಾಯೋ 1.5 ರೂಪಾಯೋ ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ. ಸೊ ಲೇಬರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ವೇರಿಯೇಬಲ್ಲು, ಇನ್ನು ಮಿಕ್ಕಿದೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟು. ಅವರು ರಾ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ತರಲೇಬೇಕು, ಮತ್ತು ಅವ್ರು ಇದನ್ನ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಏನೇನಿದೆಯೋ ಅದೆಲ್ಲದನ್ನು ಅವ್ರು ಮಾಡಲೇಬೇಕು. ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಮಾಡೋದು ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋದೇನೆ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ. ಇಲ್ಲ ಇವ್ರನ್ನ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಗಂಟೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿಸ್ತಾರೆ, ಇಲ್ಲ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆದಷ್ಟು ಕಡಿಮೆ ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಹೀಗೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಕೊಡೋದನ್ನು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಹೊರತು ಇನ್ಯಾವುದಕ್ಕೂ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನವನ್ನು ಮಾತ್ರ ಇವರು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ಆಂದೋಲನಗಳಾಯಿತು ಈಗ ಒಂದು 20-30 ವರ್ಷದ ಹಿಂದೆ. ಇದೊಂದು ಗ್ಲೋಬಲ್ ಸಪ್ಲೈ ಚೈನ್ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಯುರೋಪ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಅಮೆರಿಕಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಇರೋವಂಥ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳು ಅಲ್ಲಿದಾವಲ್ಲ, ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋವಂಥ ಸಂಘಟನೆಗಳು ನಮ್ಮ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡು ಅಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಶೋಷಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ತೊಗೊಂಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ನಾವಿಲ್ಲಿ ಮ್ಯಾನಿಟರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೆಲ್ಲ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಆಂದೋಲನಗಳು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆದಾಗ ಈ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಎಚ್ಚೆತ್ಕೊಂತು. ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದರೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಮುಖ ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕಲ್ಲ, ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕವಾಗಿ ಅವರು ಒಳ್ಳೆಯವರು ಅಂತ ತೋರಿಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ. ಸೊ ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ಕೋಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಂಡಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರು, ನೀವು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಯು ಶುಡ್ ಫಾಲೋ ಯುವರ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಲಾ ಅಂತ ಏನಿದೆಯೋ ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಲೋಕಲ್ ಲಾ ಏನಿದೆ, ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಲಾ ಏನಿದೆ, ನೀವು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ವ್ಯವಹಾರ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅನ್ನೋ ಅಂತ ಆದಾಗ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನವನ್ನು ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಗ್ನೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಲಾಯಿತು. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಒಂದೊಂದು ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿಗೂ ಹೋಗಿ ನಾವು ವೇತನ ಒಪ್ಪಂದ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿಗಳು ದೊಡ್ಡವಿದ್ದಾವೆ. ಶಾಹಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ಸು, ಗೋಕುಲ್ದಾಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ಸ್, ಅವ್ರದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಒಬ್ಬೊಬ್ರದ್ದು 30 ಯೂನಿಟ್ 40 ಯೂನಿಟ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ. ನಾವು 1 ಯೂನಿಟಲ್ಲಿ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಮಗೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಕೊಡಿ ಅಂತ, ಅದು ಒಂಥರ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಯಾವ ಥರ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆನಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಬಂಧಿಸಲ್ಪಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಆ ಥರ ಕೇಳೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಗೆ ಇದೊಂದು ಲೇಬರ್ ಓರಿಯೆಂಟೆಡ್ ಅಲ್ವಾ, ತುಂಬ ಜನ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಇವರಿಗೆ ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನನೇ ಫುಲ್ಲು ಅದೇ ನಿಕ್ಕಿ. ಆದರೆ ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನವನ್ನಾದರೂ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇದೊಂದು 40-45 ವರ್ಷದ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ತಗೊಂತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ವೇತನ ಇದೇನು ಹೇಳುತ್ತೆ, ಕಾನೂನೇನು ಹೇಳುತ್ತೆ, ಪ್ರತಿ 3-5 ವರ್ಷಕ್ಕೊಂದ್ಸರಿ ಪರಿಷ್ಕರಣೆ ಆಗಬೇಕು ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನವನ್ನು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಸುಮಾರು 106 ಅನುಸೂಚಿತ ಉದ್ಯಮಗಳಿದ್ದಾವೆ, ಶೆಡ್ಯೂಲ್ಡ್ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇದ್ದಾವೆ ಇವಾಗ. ಆದರೆ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟಾಗಿ 1979ರಿಂದನೂ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿಗೆ ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನವನ್ನು ಕಾಲಕ್ಕೆ ಪರಿಷ್ಕರಣೆ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಒಂದು. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಇವತ್ತು ಇನ್ನೂ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇದೆ. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಪರಿಷ್ಕರಣೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೂ 1 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಅಥವಾ 1.5 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ತಿಂಗಳಿಗೆ, 1 ರೂಪಾಯಿಂದ 1 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ. ಅದರಿಂದ ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಇನ್ನೂ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇದೆ. ಅಥವಾ ಒಂದ್ಸರಿ ಪರಿಷ್ಕರಣೆ ಒಂದು 5 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಏನೋ ಮಾಡ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅವರು ಕೋರ್ಟಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. ಕೋರ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಆಗೋ ಅಷ್ಟೊತ್ತಿಗೆ ಒಂದು 5-6 ವರ್ಷ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆವಾಗ ಆ ಗ್ಯಾಪು ಇನ್ನೂ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಇಲ್ಲ ಕೋರ್ಟಿಗೆ ಹೋಗಲ್ಲ, ಏನೋ ಇದು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ, ಏನೋ ಅಧಿಸೂಚನೆ ಬಂದಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಮಾಲೀಕರು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಲಾಬಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಸರ್ಕಾರದಲ್ಲಿ. ನಮ್ಮ ಹತ್ರ ಇದೆ, ಸರ್ಕಾರನೇ ತಾನೇ ಹೊರಡಿಸಿದ ಅಧಿಸೂಚನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಹಿಂದಕ್ಕೆ ತಗೊಳುತ್ತೆ. ಇಲ್ಲ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಟೈಪೋ ಎರರ್ ಆಗಿತ್ತು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಇದನ್ನು ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ನೋಡಿಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ವಾಪಸ್ ತಗೊಳ್ಳೋದು. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನ ನಾವು 2007ರವರೆಗೂ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಮಾಡೋದೇ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ನಾವು 2007ರಿಂದ ಇದನ್ನ ಕೋರ್ಟಿಗೆ ತೊಗೊಂಡೋಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ಗಳು ಗೊತ್ತಲ್ಲ. ಇವಾಗ ನಾವು 2010ರಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಕಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ 13ರಲ್ಲಿ ಇದು ಬಂತು, 9ರಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಕಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ 13ರಲ್ಲಿ ತೀರ್ಪು ಬಂತು, 13ರಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ 14ರಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು 1,500 ಒಂದೇ ಸರಿ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಯಿತು. ಅದನ್ನೇ ಅವರು ಸುಪ್ರಿಯಾ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು, ಒಂದು ಸಿಗ್ನಿಫಿಕೆಂಟ್ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಯಿತು. ಆ 14ರಿಂದ ಇವತ್ತಾಗಲೇ 25 ಮುಗಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಅದಾದಮೇಲೆ ಬರೀ ಗುದ್ದಾಟನೇ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳು, ನಮ್ಮ ನಮ್ಮ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಕಾರಣ. ಇದನ್ನು ನಾನು ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ನೋಡುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳು ಇಲ್ಲಿರೋರೆಲ್ಲ ಮಹಿಳೆಯರು. ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಜನ ಹೇಳಿರೋದು ಕೇಳಿದ್ದೀನಿ ನಾನು. ಮಹಿಳೆಯರು ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಪೂರಕ ಆದಾಯ ಅವ್ರ ಮನೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಫುಲ್ಲು ಅವರು ಕುಟುಂಬ ಎಲ್ಲ ನಡೆಸೋಷ್ಟು ನಾವು ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಸರ್ಕಾರಿ ಅಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳು ಹೇಳೋದನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಹೇಳೋದನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಆದರೆ ವಾಸ್ತವ ಏನಂತಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿರೋರು 60ರಿಂದ 70% ಜನ ಅವರ ಒಂದು ವೇತನದಿಂದ ಕುಟುಂಬವನ್ನು ನಡೆಸ್ತಾ ಇರೋರು. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನು ಯಾಕೆ ಹೇಳಿದೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಭವಿಷ್ಯ ಈ ಥರ ಫ್ಯೂಚರ್ ಅಂತ ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಕರಿತೀವಿ ನಾವು, ಈ ಥರ ಇದೆ. ಸರ್ಕಾರದ ನೀತಿ ನಿಯಮಗಳು ಏನಿದ್ರೂ ಮಾಲೀಕರ ಪರ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಹೊರತು ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ನಾವು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇರೋದೇನಂತಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗ 2025 ಏಪ್ರಿಲಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ನೋಟಿಫಿಕೇಷನಿಂದ ಹೊರಗೆ ಬಂತು. ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ 23,000 ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಕೇವಲ 19 ಉದ್ಯಮಗಳನ್ನ ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಅದರೊಳಗೆ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಒಂದು. ಏನು ಕಾರಣ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಈ ಉದ್ಯಮಗಳು ತುಂಬ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ನಾವೇ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ, ಅವರ ಉದ್ಯಮಗಳದಾರನ್ನು ಕರೆದು ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನನ ಫಿಕ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ, ಇದೇನು ಫೇರ್ ವೇಜ್ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಹಿಂಗಾದಾಗ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋರು ಮಹಿಳೆಯರು. ಈ 19 ಉದ್ಯಮಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋದು ಬಿಡಿ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಗೋಡಂಬಿ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಪ್ಲಾಂಟೇಶನ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. ಇಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಮಹಿಳೆಯರು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋದು. ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮಾತ್ರ 10,000 12,000 ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಇನ್ನು ಮಿಕ್ದವ್ರಿಗೆಲ್ಲ 23,000. ಇದು ಯಾವ ನ್ಯಾಯ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನ್ಯಾಯ ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಳೋದಲ್ಲ. ಒಟ್ಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರ ಸರ್ಕಾರದ ಧೋರಣೆ. ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ, ಓಪನ್ ಆಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ನೀವು ಸರ್ಕಾರಿ ಪ್ರಾಯೋಜಿತ ಲಿಂಗ ತಾರತಮ್ಯ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ವಾದ ಒಂದು ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಯಾಕೆ ಇದನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಫ್ಯೂಚರ್ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಭವಿಷ್ಯವನ್ನು ಸರ್ಕಾರದ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಏನೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಏನಂತಂದರೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಷ್ಟನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಮತ್ತು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಉದ್ಯೋಗ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದೇ ಹೆಚ್ಚು. ಯಾವ ಉದ್ಯೋಗ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಈ ಥರ ನಿಮಗೆ ಉದ್ಯೋಗ ನೋಡಮ್ಮ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲ ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಏನೋ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ ನೀವು ನೋಡಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಇದೊಂದು ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾನು ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಒಂದು ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಒಗ್ಗೂಡಿ ಒಂದು 58 ದಿನದ ಮುಷ್ಕರ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಶ್ರೀರಂಗಪಟ್ಟಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಇತ್ತು, ಗೋಕುಲ್ದಾಸರಿಗೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಒಂದು ಯೂನಿಟ್. ಕೋವಿಡ್ ಆಗಿ ಇನ್ನು ಕೋವಿಡ್ ಇದರೊಳಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಏಪ್ರಿಲಲ್ಲಿ ಲಾಕ್ಡೌನ್ ಆಯಿತು, ಮೇನಲ್ಲಿ ತೆಗೀತು, ಜೂನಲ್ಲಿ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಲಾಕ್ಡೌನ್ ಆಯಿತು. ಲೇ ಆಫ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಮುಚ್ಚೋವಂಥ ಉದ್ದೇಶದಿಂದ ಲೇ ಆಫ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿಬಿಟ್ರು. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ಒಂದು 1,800 ಜನ ಇದ್ದರು, ಒಗ್ಗೂಡಿದ್ರು, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಒಗ್ಗೂಡಿದ್ರು. ಅವರೆಲ್ಲ 10 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಫೇಮಸ್ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡು H&Mಗೆ ಹೊಲಿತಾಯಿದ್ರು ಅವರು. ಇದಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಂಗೆ ಅದು ಏನು ಕಾನೂನು ತೊಗೋಬೇಕು, ಲೇ ಆಫ್ ತೊಗೋಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಇಲಾಖೆಗೆ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ನೀವು. ಅದೇನೂ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಆಯಿತಾ. ಇದಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಂಗೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಶಾಕ್ ಆದರು. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ 10 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಅವರೇನೋ ಬದುಕು ಕಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರು, ಒಂದು ನಿಶ್ಚಿತ ಆದಾಯ ಬರ್ತಾಯಿತ್ತು. ಅದು ಶ್ರೀರಂಗಪಟ್ಟಣ ಅಂತ ಸಣ್ಣ ಪಟ್ಟಣ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇರೆ ಯಾವುದೂ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆಗಳಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಹೀಗಾಗಿ ಅವರು ಶಾಕ್ ಆದರು. 58 ದಿನ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಪ್ರಿಮೈಸಸ್ಸಲ್ಲೇ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಪ್ರತಿಭಟನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ನಮಗೆ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಓಪನ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಡಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಆ ಇಡೀ ಪ್ರಕ್ರಿಯೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಏನೇನು ಕಂಡು ಬಂತು ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹಂಚ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಇಡೀ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇದರೊಳಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಮೊದಲನೇ ದಿನ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ 10 ವರ್ಷ ದುಡಿದ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ ಏಕಾಏಕಿ ಬೀದಿಗೆ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಿದ್ರು. ಗೇಟ್ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಅಷ್ಟೇ, ಬರೋ ಹಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ನೀವು ಇವತ್ತು. ಸೊ ಏನು ಹಾಗಾದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ನಾನು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ದುಡ್ದಿದ್ದು ಹಗಲು ರಾತ್ರಿಯಿಂದ ದುಡ್ದಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆಲ್ಲ ದುಡ್ದಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ನೀವು ಭಾನುವಾರ ಬಾ ಅಂದರೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಇವತ್ತು 7 ಗಂಟೆವರೆಗೂ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋದ್ರೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ 8 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ ಬಾ ಅಂದರೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ನನ್ನ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಅನ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅಭಿಮಾನದಿಂದ ದುಡ್ದಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಒಂದು ಫೈನ್ ಡೇ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟ ಆಯಿತು, ನೀವು ಅದನ್ನು ಮುಚ್ಚಿದ್ರಿ. ಸೊ ಇದು ನನಗೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಅಂಥ ಒಂದು ಕೆಲಸದ ಅಭದ್ರತೆಯನ್ನು ತೋರಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ನೆಗೆಟಿವ್ಸ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ, ನಾನು ನೆಗೆಟಿವ್ಸ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಒಂದು, ಕೆಲಸದ ಸ್ಥಳದಲ್ಲಿ ಪಿತೃಪ್ರಧಾನತೆ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ಪೇಟ್ರಿಯಾರ್ಕಲ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ಮು, ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಮಹಿಳೆಯರನ್ನೇ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಯಾಕೆ ನೇಮಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ ಸೂಪರ್ವೈಸರ್ಗಳನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಗಂಡಸ್ರನ್ನ ಯಾಕೆ ಇಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ಈ ಹೆಣ್ಮಕ್ಳು ಎದುರು ಬೀಳಲ್ಲ, ತಿರುಗಿ ನೋಡಲ್ಲ, ಹೆದರ್ಸಿದ್ರೆ ಹೆದರ್ಕೋತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಒಂದು ಸೋಷಿಯಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ ಪೇಟ್ರಿಯಾರ್ಕಿ ಸೊಸೈಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ, ಅದೇ ಸೇಮ್ ರಿಫ್ಲೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಒಳಗಡೆ. ಸೊ ಅವಾಗೇನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಏಕತಾನತೆಯ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಬೇಜಾರಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಒಂದೇ ಪೀಸ್ನ ನೀನು 800 ಹೊಲಿಬೇಕು, ದಿನಾಗ್ಲೂ ಕಣ್ಣು ಮುಚ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೊಲಿತಾ ಇರೋದು. ಆ ಪೀಸು ಯಾವ ಬಟ್ಟೆಯ ಭಾಗ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ನನಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ನಾನು ರೆಡಿ ಮಾಡೋ ಅಂಥ ಉತ್ಪನ್ನ ಯಾವುದು ಅಂತ ನೋಡೋ ಅಂಥ ಸುಖ ನನಗೆ ಸಿಕ್ಕೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಏನೋ ಒಂಥರ ಈ ಗಾಣದೆತ್ತ ತಿರುಗ್ದಂಗೆ ಒಂದೇ ಸಮ ಹೊಲಿಯೋದು. ನೀವು 40 ವರ್ಷ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿರಿ, 30 ವರ್ಷ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿರಿ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ, ನೀನು ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಬಂದು ನೀನೇ ಒಂದು ಬಟ್ಟೆ ಹೊಲಿಗೆ ಹಾಕ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಿನ್ನ ಜೀವನ ನೀನು ಕಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದರೆ ಆ ಥರ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಹಿಂಗಾದಾಗ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಡಿಸಿಷನ್ ಮೇಕಿಂಗ್ ಪವರ್ ಇರಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ. ಅವ್ನು ಯಾರೋ ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ನೀನು ಇಷ್ಟು ಹೊಲಿ, ಇದನ್ನು ಹೊಲಿಬೇಕು ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ. ಇವತ್ತು ಯಾವುದು ಏನು ಹೊಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ, ಇದು ಎಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ, ಇದ್ರದ್ದು ಎಷ್ಟು ದುಡ್ಡು ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಕಾರ್ಖಾನೆಯ ಯಾವುದೇ ಆರ್ಥಿಕ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನನಗೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಭಾಗ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಮನೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಂಗೆನೆ, ನೀನೇನು ಕೇಳಬೇಡ, ನಿನ್ನ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋ ಅಷ್ಟೇ, ಯಾವುದಕ್ಕೂ ಕೇಳಬೇಡ ಅಂತ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಟ್ರೈನ್ ಮಾಡಲಾಗಿರುತ್ತೋ ಆ ಸಮಾಜದ ಒಂದು ರೆಪ್ಲಿಕೇಶನ್ ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಮಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಯಿತು. ಮತ್ತು ಇದು ತುಂಬ ದೊಡ್ಡದೊಡಿತು. ಅದು ನಾನು ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ದಿನ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದು. 58 ದಿನದ ಇದು. ಸ್ಥಳೀಯ ಆಡಳಿತ ಬಂತು, ಕುಟುಂಬದವರು ಒತ್ತಡ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರು, 58 ದಿನ ಯಾಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂತ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಹಳ್ಳಿಗಳಿಂದ ಬರ್ತಿರೋರು. ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಹೆದರಿಸಿದ್ರು ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ಇದು ಕೋವಿಡ್ಡು, ನೀವೇನಾದ್ರೂ ಹಿಂಗೇನೆ ನಾವು ಕೊಟ್ಟಷ್ಟು ಇಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಡಿ, ಇವಾಗ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ವಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ರಿಸೈನ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ನಿಮಗೆ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ, ಇಲ್ಲದ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲೇ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ, ನಮಗೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಕಂಡ್ರೆ ಭಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೆ ಒಬ್ಬ ಗ್ರಾಮೀಣ ಹೆಣ್ಮಗಳು ಶ್ರೀರಂಗಪಟ್ಟಣದಲ್ಲಿರೋಳಿಗೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಅಂದ್ರೇನೆ ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಭಯ. ಎಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕೋ, ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕೋ, ಏನೋ ಎತ್ತ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇಲ್ಲ ಅದನ್ನು ಹಾಕಿ ವಿತಿನ್ 8 ಡೇಸಲ್ಲಿ 800 ಜನನ ರಾಜೀನಾಮೆ ತೊಗೊಂಡ್ಬಿಟ್ರು. ಸೊ ಇನ್ನು ಉಳಿದವರು 58 ದಿನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಅಂತ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಸೊ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅಕ್ಕಪಕ್ಕ ಟೀ ಅಂಗಡಿಗಳಿಂದ ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಹೇಳ್ಸೋದು, ಯಾಕಮ್ಮ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ, ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗ್ರಮ್ಮ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದನ್ನ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಸೋದು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಆಟೋಗಳು ಕರ್ಕೊಂಬರ್ತಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ ಹಳ್ಳಿಯಿಂದ, ಅದನ್ನು ಆಟೋದವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಡೋದು, ನೀವು ಕರ್ಕೊಂಬರ್ಬೇಡ್ರಿ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಹಳ್ಳಿನಲ್ಲಿ 2 ರೋಡಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ. ಈ ಕಡೆ ರೋಡ್ನವರೆಲ್ಲ ಸೆಟ್ಲ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ತೊಗೊಂಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ನೀನು ಯಾಕೆ ಪ್ರತಿಭಟನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ, ನೀನು ಎಲ್ಲ ಮುಗಿಸ್ಕೊಂಬರ್ಬೇಕು ತಾನೆ ಅಂತ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅತ್ತೆ ಮಾವ ಗಂಡ ಇದು. ಸೊ ಇದು ಎಷ್ಟು ಒತ್ತಡ ಇದೆ ಹೆಣ್ಮಕ್ಳ ಮೇಲೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಈ ಒಂದು ಇದರಿಂದ ನೋಡ್ಬೋದು. ಒಂದು ಕುಟುಂಬದ ಒತ್ತಡ, ಒಂದು ಸಮಾಜದ ಒತ್ತಡ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ಯಾಂಡಮಿಕ್, ತಹಶೀಲ್ದಾರ್ ಬರ್ತಾರೆ, ಪೊಲೀಸ್ DYSP ಬರ್ತಾರೆ, ನೀವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಾರೆ. ಇದು ಯಾರನ್ನು ಕೇಳಬೇಕು ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. MP ಬಂದರು, ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಲೋಕಲ್ MLA ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ಮತ್ತು ಇದು ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಸಚಿವನೂ ಹೋದರು, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಹೋದ್ರೂ ಕಡೆಗೂ ಏನೂ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೆ ಒಂದೇ ಒಂದು ಇವರು ಪ್ರತಿಭಟಿಸಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ ಇದು ನೆಗೆಟಿವ್ಗಳು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ನಾನು. ಸೊ ಒಬ್ಬ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಆಪ್ರೇಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಎಲ್ಲದನ್ನೂ, ಮಹಿಳೆಯರಿಗೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿ ಏನು ಅಧಿಕಾರನೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾನು ಇದಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದು ಪಾಸಿಟಿವ್ ಏನಂತಂದರೆ, ಅದೇ ಸಮಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನಲ್ಲೂ ಸುಮಾರು ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿಗಳು ಮುಚ್ಚೋಯ್ತು. ಆದರೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲೂ ಈ ಥರ ಪ್ರತಿಭಟನೆಗಳಾಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಇವೆರಡು ತುಂಬ ನಾವು ನೋಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋ ಅಂಥ ವಿಷಯ. ಹೇಗೆ ಪ್ಲೇಸಸ್ ಮ್ಯಾಟರ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಅಂಥ ಒಂದು ಇದರೊಳಗಡೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಒಂಥರ ಅಪರಿಚಿತರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಲೋಕಲ್ MLA ಹತ್ರ ಅವರು ಆರಾಮಾಗಿ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯನೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಹೋಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಆ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ಮೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲಿ. ಮತ್ತು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು, ಈ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಅಲ್ಲ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಅಂತ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಆಪ್ಷನ್ಗಳಿರ್ತವೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನೂ ನಾವು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಯಾಕೆ 58 ದಿನ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಯ್ತು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಆ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಇದರೊಳಗಡೆ ನೋಡ್ಬೋದು ಅಂತ ನನಗನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ಇದೊಂದನ್ನು ನಾನು ಅದೇ ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಏನು ಯಾವ ಥರ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಫ್ಯೂಚರ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಇವತ್ತು ಎಲ್ಲ ಬದಲಾಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಇದು ಫಾರಿನ್ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ ಆಧಾರ ಪಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಟ್ರಂಪ್ದು ಟ್ಯಾರಿಫ್ ಬಂದಿದೆ. ಈಗ ನಾವು ಮಿನಿಮಮ್ ವೇಜ್ಗೆ ಹೊಡೆದಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಈಗ 3 ತಿಂಗಳಿಂದ ಸುಮ್ಮನಾಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ ನಾವು. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ವಾಯ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಒಂಥರ ಬೆಲೆನೇ ಒಂಥರ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅಯ್ಯೋ ನಮ್ಮ ಕೆಲಸ ಉಳಿದ್ರೆ ಸಾಕು ಅಂತಿದೆ, ಇವ್ರು ಬಂದರು ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ವೇತನ ಕೇಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂತ ಆ ಥರ ಪೊಸಿಷನ್ಗೆ ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಕೆಲಸ ಉಳ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಸಾಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಥರ. ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಇನ್ನೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೆ ನಾವು ಊಹೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ಆ ಟ್ಯಾರಿಫ್ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ವಿಯೆಟ್ನಾಮಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ಯಾರಿಫ್ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಬಾಂಗ್ಲಾದೇಶಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ಯಾರಿಫ್ ಇಲ್ಲ. ನೀನು ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಿಂದ ನೀನು ಇಂಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋತಿದ್ಯಾ ಅಂದರೆ ನೀನು ಹೆಚ್ಚಿಗೆ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಕಟ್ಟು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಯಾವ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾನೆ? ಯಾವ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಹತ್ರ ಬರ್ತಾನೆ? ಸೊ ಇದು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು, ಆಗದೇನೂ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. ಬಟ್ ಈ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಯಾರೋ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾಡೋ ಅಂಥ ಒಂದು ಡಿಸಿಷನ್ನು ಬೇರೆ ಯಾರಿಗೂ ತೊಂದರೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋವಂಥ ಲೋಕಲ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ನ ಹೇಗೆ ಅಸ್ಥಿರಗೊಳಿಸುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ. ಇದರೊಳಗಡೆ ಒಂದು 5 ನಿಮಿಷ ಇದೆಯಾ? 5 ಮಿನಿಟ್ಸ್? ಓಕೆ, 2 ಮಿನಿಟ್ಸ್. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು 2 ಮಿನಿಟ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಡಿ ಎ ಕೊಡಬೇಕಲ್ಲ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ಗೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ಯಾಂಡಮಿಕ್ಕಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿ ಎನಲ್ಲಿ ಇವರೆಲ್ಲ ಬರೆದ್ರು, ಇಲ್ಲ ನಮಗೆ ಡಿ ಎ ಕೊಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ, ಪ್ಯಾಂಡಮಿಕ್ಕು ಹಂಗಾಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಹಿಂಗಾಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಅಂತ. ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಅಧಿಕೃತವಾಗಿ ನೋಟಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್ ಹೊರಡಿಸ್ತು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಡಿ ಎ ಕೊಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಅವ್ರು ಕೇಳಿದ 4 ತಿಂಗಳಾದರೆ ಇವರು ಒಂದು ವರ್ಷ ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಹಾಕ್ಬಿಟ್ರು. 2020 2021 ಏಪ್ರಿಲ್ವರೆಗೂ ಏನು ಡಿ ಎ ಕೊಡೋದೇ ಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಸೊ ಯಾಕಿದನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ? ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಫೈಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಒಂದು 300 ಕೋಟಿ ಅಷ್ಟು ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ 3 ಲಕ್ಷ ಜನಕ್ಕೆ 300 ಕೋಟಿ ಅಷ್ಟು ಬಂತು. ನಾವು ಅಷ್ಟು ಅದನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ಟ್ಗೆ ಹಾಕಿದ್ವಿ, ಇಂಟರ್ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಸ್ ಮಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ತೊಗೊಂಡೋದ್ವಿ, ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿ ಒಂದು 300 ಕೋಟಿ ಅಷ್ಟು ಕೊಟ್ಟರು. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾಕೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳ ಧೋರಣೆ ಹೆಂಗಿದೆ, ಅವರ ಪಾಲಿಸಿಗಳ ಧೋರಣೆ ಹೆಂಗಿದೆ, ಮತ್ತು ಸ್ವತಃ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಯಾವ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆಯಿಂದ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಎಲ್ಲ ನೋಡ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಮಹಿಳಾ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಅಸಂಘಟಿತ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ದುಡಿತಾ ಇರೋರು, ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ, ಫಿಕ್ಸ್ ಟರ್ಮ್ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಹೀಗೆಲ್ಲ ಆಗುವಾಗ ಫ್ಯೂಚರ್ ಏನೋ ನೆಗೆಟಿವ್ ಅಂತಲ್ಲ, ಒಂಥರ ನಿರಾಶಾದಾಯಕ ಅಂತಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ಆದ್ರೂ ಒಂದು ಆಶಾದಾಯಕ ಬೆಳವಣಿಗೆ ಅಂತೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಒಂದು ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನೋ ಬದುಕಿರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ತಿನ್ನಬೇಕು, ಎಷ್ಟು ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಇಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಸಿಚುಯೇಷನ್ ಇದೆಯಾ ಹೊರತು ಇನ್ನು ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ನನಗನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ನನಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಮಾತಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು.
Dhanyawad, Dr. Prathibha. So we have some time, maybe 10-15 minutes for discussion and any questions or comments that people want to make. Yes. Can we lower the light so you can come out?
Good evening. I have a few questions on what you spoke about. One is that you said that up to the 80s it was easy to mobilize workers to protest, etc., etc. And over a period of time, those kinds of protests have disappeared. For example, if you look at the Bombay mill workers' strike, which of course eventually led to the closure of the industry itself, but that kind of large mobilization is not possible today. So why do you think, what has happened that it has changed? The second thing is, as you rightly said, the economy is moving from agri to manufacturing. From manufacturing it has gone to services. And if you look at the kind of attitude of the service workers, they really don't want to be organized. They take their, for example, you look at the very classic example of the IT industry, which is basically a service industry. Except now, suddenly they feel that there's a job loss. But otherwise, they didn't really want to be called unionized workers. And the third thing that I wanted to ask Doctor is, has the paradigm of employment changed? Are we looking at a paradigm where, I know for example that my father's generation, they stuck with one job. In my generation, we did 2 or 3 job changes. But if you look at the current generation, the people are not really interested in the permanency of employment with a particular employer. They are more interested in moving from job to job. So the whole paradigm of this permanency, etc., has changed. So do trade unions also need to look at this aspect of the way people are looking at employment and relook at the way that they can organize it? I'm not looking at the garment industry. Yes, garment industry is perhaps a different kind of industry, but I'm looking at an overall picture, and I think that there is a paradigm shift in the way that employment is looked at. Yeah, these are the three things that I want. So these are my questions for you, actually.
Should we take two comments and then we can?
Good evening. I come from the aerospace background, and nearly 40 years I have been in that field. Okay. My question is, as you said, whether you like it or not, capital investment becomes necessary. It's inevitable, and even the customers will insist on more automation or high CNC machines, transfer lines, etc. And it becomes necessary for a worker to upskill himself and accept the changes. Okay, this is my experience. I'm seeing from the other side. I can share with you. Quite often, people get stuck with whatever the skill they have when they started maybe 10 years back or 15 years back. Slightly, they'll be reluctant to accept bigger challenges, like can you do the programming, or can you do work in an automated line, can you do something else, or work in a ERP. Quite often, instead of upskilling, they look at secure jobs rather than the growth of the industry. Now, my question is, worker need not become a white-collar officer later, but by upskilling, he can retain his job, or he can retain his importance, and can still remain in a union person, because the definition of a worker is quite, comfortable, or can be used as it is given in the, Factory Act. But quite often we see that people get stuck with whatever they have been doing for decades. This leads to the management to look for a younger contract workers who are ready to upskill, who are ready with more skill and talent, and take away the jobs of the permanent workers. I mean, I'm not saying what is happening is right, but this is the reality. So, is there a way to tell our workers to upskill and rise up in the ladder? And they don't need to step out of the trade unions or anything, but it is necessary for them, because I had the opportunity of working elsewhere outside India. There, even the manager or whatever, whomever you call, he's still a worker. He need not be a part of the white collar or management. So, what is the way out? Thank you.
You can, or whichever, you have a mic there also.
Thank you. Does it work? It's working. So thank you very much for the questions. I'll start with the three questions that you asked, sir. So why is it not possible to organize workers in the same scale as it was possible up until, let's say, the mid-1980s? So there's a whole range of responses to that, but let me just say very briefly that the terms and conditions of employment have changed. And one point which I mentioned during my talk was that as you bring in contracts and insecurity of employment, the inclination of workers to go in for unionized activities is much less. But moving beyond that, for example, in textiles, the large collection of workers in assembly line production, or even in automobiles, in assembly line production, that itself is not there anymore, as the larger players in the sector, for example, Arvind or any of the larger mills, have moved towards higher technologies of production, requiring less of unskilled and semi-skilled and more of skilled labor, so less in number of labor. And the mentality or the psychology of skilled labor is not so much towards collective bargaining, because collective bargaining itself has dangers and also has a stigma. But the entire process of bargaining today in industry has become individualized. So there are individual level negotiations between management and workers, and this has actually been one of the most potent instruments in the hands of management to destroy collective organization. They do not talk to workers as a collective, they strike individual bargains with individual workers. So therefore the whole question of organization at that level or at that scale is slowly disappearing. But let me also say on the other side that the trade unions today are a highly fragmented space. Even within Karnataka itself, trade unions in the garment industry, and Prathibha and I both keep talking about the garment industry because we're engaged there, has gone through 5 or 6 major splits, even in a very small space. And this we're talking about a workforce where only 8 to 10% is unionized. So if there are 6 major union players in a site where only 8 to 10% are unionized, where does the worker go? So it's not just, and this fragmentation is happening at the national scale also. The new trade union initiative of India, which came into being in the 1990s, just sort of an umbrella organization for informal workers, that itself has fumbled because of internal disputes, internal disagreements. Many have stepped out, others have stepped in. There is no organized unified forum for worker rights. So why blame only the management, or why blame only the policymakers? There's enough to talk about on the other side also. My sympathies are entirely on the other side, but I still look at myself as a critical observer. But anyway, so that's in answer to your first question. Briefly to answer to your 2 other questions. In the services sector, I think the services sector is very diverse, So if you're looking, for example, at app-based workers, there is a tremendous urge to organize themselves. They're called delivery partners, but they are actually underpaid and underserved people, young men, who come to your doorstep with your food or with your groceries or with whatever. And there's enormous exploitation through a whole gamut of instruments, not just of payment, but of surveillance, of monitoring their every movement, and also slipping them up on many occasions. If they are not able to deliver for some reason, it's very easy for them to lose the entire assignment. But there is an enormous move, in places like Hyderabad, not so much in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, to unionize these workers, and there's a lot of collective self-mobilization and self-organization. In the IT sector, yes, again, there is a stigma to unionization, but as more and more automation, AI, etc., hits the sector, I think we are probably going to see collective organization, but of a different kind. These will not be strikes or dharnas, which we're used to, but it will be of a different kind. The permanency paradigm, definitely, it is changing, and people are not looking for permanent jobs in the way in which we had in our generation. But it is still, it's very much a social and economic class thing. Very highly skilled technical people, engineers, researchers, technical people, may not be looking for permanent jobs because their stakes are different. They may move from one job to another, they may go to the US, come back, go some other place. So mobility is enormous in that sector. But you would be surprised to know that the lower you go in the social hierarchy, the desire and the anxiety for a permanent government job is really enormous. The number of people who apply even for, lower level police jobs, just because these are regular permanent appointments, it is astounding. So it's still a question of, the way in which the social inequality maps those who are looking for permanent jobs and those who are not. So let me come to your point about upscaling. It definitely, upscaling is something that needs to happen and doesn't happen. And I agree with you that there is resistance to the whole idea of upscaling. But that resistance is a function of two things. One is companies themselves don't offer upscaling opportunities, In the public sector, there is a huge amount of stagnation because there is no upscaling. But in the public sector also, the resistance to upscaling is because there is no incentive to it. You don't lose a public sector job because you haven't upscaled. You still can retain your job. Of course, you can be replaced. You can be replaced. I mean, the job can be transferred into one that belongs, that is given to a contract worker who has more skills. But the person who is replaced will still remain in employment. He will probably be doing, more mundane kind of work and not be able to match his skills to the organization's, turnover or the new technologies that are coming in. So it's not just individual resistance or the resistance of workers, it's a question of the dynamics between management and worker. The management really want to shift to contract jobs, and therefore it's to the management's interest also to not provide opportunities for skilling, but to bring in contract workers who have better skills. But definitely the public sector mentality works to prevent higher skills, and it also, I think, applies to large private sector organizations where there are still regular jobs and you don't need to necessarily reskill yourself to keep the jobs.
Hi, I have a question related to what you had spoken about. So, given the fact that this entire pressure on salaries for labor class and kind of like fair wages, and from what I understand, a lot of it also comes because of profitability pressures, because of organizations being listed on stock markets and everything. And if you're going to be looking at the textile industry, there's a lot of things about how these textile companies have this high, which you were speaking about, high MRPs, and the brand profitability and all comes into play. Is there an opportunity to look at three things from a regulation and from this point of view, which is one, looking at percentage of salary, percentage of your cost structure coming from the salary and wages that you provide. Two, capping of the salaries of your highest CEO versus labor, because typically a lot of money ends up getting paid at the top and at the cost of people, at a less, more at the labor level. And, okay, I forgot the third one, but yeah.
Hello. I don't have a question per se, just an observation. I'm from Tamil Nadu. We have a small farmland, and we have lived there for 12, 13 years now. Increasingly, it has become very hard to find farm laborers, especially women, who are the most important people when it comes to transplanting or weeding. And women don't want to do these jobs anymore because there are 2 textile companies that have come up in the local area, and their biggest workforce is women primarily, except for the supervisors who are men. And these women work almost like 28 days of a month. So a lot of Sundays they are working, and at least 10 hours. The thing that is very attractive for these women is they get to, wear nice saris, carry a lunch bag. There is a company bus that comes to pick them up. So they are suddenly elevated in social status now, like what Dr. Prathibha was talking about, in this patriarchal society where they have not been given any importance. Suddenly, not doing the agricultural job and doing this company job has elevated their status. I've talked to several of them, and they said they don't mind doing this job, which involves 9 hours standing. There is not even a stool provided. They just cannot sit. And they do just mundane one operation over and over and over again. But they don't mind it. It is really very, very sad state of affairs that has driven them to, resign to this state and feel that, this is okay, better than what we are going through at home. Thank you.
Maybe, okay. Very short.
I wanted to ask about trade unions and politics in general, and at Dange's time at least, the trade unions played a huge role in politics as well, right? And that's also I see as mass participation of workers in politics, in democracy, right? And his famous motto also, unity and struggle, he first gives it in a speech to AITUC, which later becomes motto of the party. And so I wanted to ask, why is there a decline, of involvement of trade unions in politics, and the kind of questions that you raised at the end, the state having more control over the kind of jobs, and so how do you see the role of trade unions in thinking about those questions, and maybe towards a shift from service-related industry to manufacturing industry? Thank you.
Okay, sorry. My question is based on what you spoke about on Skill India. So you said there's a mismatch between the skill and the job available, and a lot of people go back to their rural homes because. So is there any data on what do they do once they go back? Do they use those skills at least there, or are they just completely mismatched and there's absolutely nothing happening?
ಇವ್ರ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ವೇತನವನ್ನು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮಾಡೋದು, ನಾನು ಆವಾಗಲೇ ಹೇಳಿದ್ನಲ್ಲ, ₹100 ವ್ಯವಹಾರ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳು ಮೇಯ್ನ್ ತೊಗೊಳತ್ವೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿರೋರು ಅಂತ. ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ಕರೆಕ್ಟು. ಒಂದು ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನೇ ಆ್ಯಸ್ ಎ ಯೂನಿಯನ್ ಡಿಮಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ವಿತ್ ದ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಲೆವೆಲ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ. ಅಂದರೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಶೇರ್ನ ನೀವು 1% ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೂ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಆ 1% ಇವರು ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಶಿಫ್ಟ್ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಇವ್ರ ವೇತನದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಪರ್ಸೆಂಟೇಜ್ ಮೇಲ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಆ ಕಡೆ ಕ್ಯಾಂಪೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನು ಎತ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ, ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿದ ಕರೆಕ್ಟು. ಒಬ್ಬ ಸೂಪರ್ವೈಸರ್ಗೆ 40,000 50,000, ಒಬ್ಬ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜರ್ಗೆ, ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ರಿ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜರ್ಗೆ 1.5 ಲಕ್ಷ 2 ಲಕ್ಷ ಸಂಬಳ, ಮತ್ತು ಒಬ್ಬ HR ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜರ್ಗೆ 4 ಲಕ್ಷ 5 ಲಕ್ಷ ಸಂಬಳ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ದ ಟೋಟಲ್ ವರ್ಕ್ ಫೋರ್ಸ್ 1,000 ಜನ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಅದರೊಳಗಡೆ ಒಂದು 40-50 ಜನನೇ ಇಡೀ ಲೇಬರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ದು ಒಂದು 60% ನುಂಗ್ಬಿಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಎತ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಇದು ಈ ಶ್ರೇಣೀಕರಣ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ ಅಥವಾ ಈ ಉದ್ಯೋಗ ಇದರೊಳಗಡೆ ಬಂದಿರೋ ಒಂದು ಇದು ಏನಂತಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಲು, ಅವ್ರ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಿ, ಅವ್ರ ರೆಸ್ಪಾನ್ಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ, ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಅವರು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರು ಎಷ್ಟರ ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಿ ತಗೋತಾರೆ, ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಆಧಾರ ಮಾಡಿಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕಡೆಗೆ ಒಬ್ಬ ವರ್ಕರು ಏನೂ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಿ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅವಳು ಏನಿದ್ರು ಬಂದು ಒಂದು ಕೂಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋವಂಥ ಲೆವೆಲ್ಗೆ ಆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ ಇಳಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇನ್ನು ಮಿಕ್ದವ್ರನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ತುಂಬ ಮೇಲಿಡಿಸೋವಂಥ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಇದು ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ. ಇದನ್ನು ಯಾವ ಥರ ನಾವು ಎತ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಇದನ್ನ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆನ, ಇದು ಒಂಥರ ನಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಸ್ಕೊಂಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ, ಒಂಥರ ಅಧಿಕೃತತೆ ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಮಿನಿಮಮ್ ವೇಜ್ ಮಾಡೋವಾಗ್ಲೇನೆ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಡು, ಸೆಮಿ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಡು, ಅನ್ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಡು, ಹೈಲಿ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಡ್ ಅಂತ ಮಾಡಿಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸರ್ಕಾರನೇ ಆ ಥರ ಮಾಡಿ ಶ್ರೇಣಿ ಅದೇನು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇಲ್ಲ, ₹1 2 ಇದ್ರೂ ಇದು ಒಂಥರ ಒಪ್ಪಿತ ನಾರ್ಮ್. ನೀನು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂದರೆ ನಿಂಗೆ ಸಂಬಳ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ನಿನ್ನ ನಗರ ಪ್ರದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂದರೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಸಂಬಳ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ನಿನ್ನ ಗ್ರಾಮೀಣ ಪ್ರದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ರೆ ಅಂದರೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಈ ಶ್ರೇಣೀಕರಣನ ಸರ್ಕಾರನೇ ಅಥವಾ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾನೂನುಗಳನ್ನೇ ಒಪ್ಪಿತ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಇವರು ಅದನ್ನು ಇನ್ನೂ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಈ ಥರ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದನ್ನು ಯಾವ ಥರ ನಾವಂತೂ ಇದನ್ನು ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟಾಗಿ ಎತ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ನಮ್ಮ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ನಮಗೆ ನಾವು ಹೊಲಿಯೋ ಅಷ್ಟನ್ನು ಆ ಸೂಪರ್ವೈಸರ್ಗೆ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಹಿಂಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅವನು ಏಯ್ ಮಾಡು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅವ್ನಿಗೆ 40,000 50,000 ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಥರ ಅವನು ದಿನ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಹೊಲಿದು ತೋರಿಸ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ನಿಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಇದನ್ನು ಯಾವ ಥರ ಇದು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಮಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನು ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟಾಗಿ ಎತ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ನೆಗೋಷಿಯೇಷನಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಮಾತಾಡೋವಾಗ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಜೊತೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ ಲೇಬರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಅಂತ. ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಲೇಬರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟು? 1000 ಜನ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ 800 ಜನ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರು ಕೊಡೋದೇ 10,000. ಅದೇ 20,000 ಇನ್ನು 20 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಈ 800 ಜನ ಕೊಡೋದನ್ನು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ ನೀವು. ಇದು ಲೇಬರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಸೊ ಅವ್ರ ಹತ್ರನೂ ಉತ್ತರ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಜನ ಬರೋಲ್ಲ, ಅಷ್ಟು ಕೊಡಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಆ ಥರ ಲೇಬರ್ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ ಹಾಗಾಗಿದೆ ಇವಾಗ. ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿನಲ್ಲಾದ್ರೂ ಆಗಲಿ, ಬೇರೆ ಎಲ್ಲಾದರೂ ಆಗಲಿ, ನೀನೊಂದು CEO ಪೋಸ್ಟ್ಗೋ ಅಥವಾ ನೀನೇನಾದರೂ ಒಬ್ಬ HR ಡಿಪಾರ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ವರೆಗೋ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಇಷ್ಟು ಕೊಡಲೇಬೇಕು. ಆ ಥರ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಿನ್ನ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಗೆ, ನಿನ್ನ ಅನುಭವಕ್ಕೆ, ಇದಕ್ಕೆಲ್ಲ ಇದು ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಇದು ನನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಉತ್ತರ. ಮತ್ತು ಇವರು ತಮಿಳ್ನಾಡಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ಇದನ್ನು ಕಾನ್ಸರ್ಟಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಯ್ಯೋ ನಮಗೆ ಕೃಷಿಗೆ ಇದು ಸಿಗಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. ಒಂದು ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಈ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಟೇಟಿವ್. 9 ಗಂಟೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿಸ್ತಾರೆ, ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡೇ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡೇ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಒಂದು ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಆದರೆ ನಾವು ನೋಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋದೇನಂತಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೊಂದು ನಿಶ್ಚಿತವಾದ ಆದಾಯ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಈ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಫಿಕ್ಸ್ಡ್ ಅರ್ನಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಫೀಲ್ಡಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನಿನಗೆ ಸೀಸನಲ್, ಅದು ನಿನಗೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಕೆಲಸ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ನಾಳೆ ನಿನಗೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಕೊಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಇನ್ನು 3 ತಿಂಗಳು ಕೆಲಸ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, 3 ತಿಂಗಳು ಕೆಲಸ ಇರಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ನೀನು ಏನನ್ನೂ ಒಂದು ಇವತ್ತು ನನಗೆ 10,000 ತಿಂಗಳಿಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆನೇ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, 10,000 ನನಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನಾನು ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ಹತ್ರ 50,000 ಸಾಲ ತೊಗೋಬೋದು. ನಾನು ತಿಂಗಳಿಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಸೇರಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆ ಒಂದು ಎಕಾನಮಿನ ನಾವು ಬಿಲ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ, ಕೆಲಸ ನಮಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದರೆ. ಸೊ ಅದರಿಂದ ಅವರು ಒಂದು ಫಿಕ್ಸೆಡ್ ಒಂದು ಇದು ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಏನು ಆದಾಯ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು. ಮತ್ತು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಸೀರೆ ಉಟ್ಕೋಬೋದು, ಒಂಥರ ಸ್ಟೇಟಸ್ಸು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಇವೆಲ್ಲ ಇರ್ಬೋದು ಅದು. ಬಟ್ ಅದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅದೊಂದು 20% ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನಮಗೊಂದು ಫಿಕ್ಸೆಡ್ ಆದಾಯ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಒಂದು ರೂಫಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಇದು ಬಿಸಿಲಲ್ಲಿ ಒಣಕೊಂಡು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋ ಬದಲು ಒಂದು ರೂಫಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಅಂತ. ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಅದನ್ನೂ ಬದಲಾವಣೆ ಆಗಿ ಇವಾಗೆಲ್ಲ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯಿಂದ ಮಾಲ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಯಾರು ಒದ್ದಾಡ್ತಾರೆ? ಅಲ್ಲೋಯ್ತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ AC-ನಲ್ಲಿ ಆರಾಮಾಗಿ ಅಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕಿಲ್ಲ, ಅಲ್ಲೂ 12 ಗಂಟೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಎಲ್ಲ ಅದು ಇನ್ನೂ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಟೇಟಿವ್. ಬಟ್ ಏನಂತಂದರೆ ನಾವು ಅಲ್ಲಿ AC-ನಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಟಾರ್ಚರ್ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಇಷ್ಟೇ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಇದು ಈ ಒಂದು ಇದು ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ನನಗೆ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ.
Thank you. So the question on trade unions, it's a really big question, and it's kind of difficult to answer it in a short time. But let me just say that the decline or the disempowerment of trade unions happened in a larger political context. And that political context, and unless we keep that in mind, it's very difficult to understand it. But that political context is driven by the whole project of economic liberalization, where the primacy of economic roles is given to private capital. So while in an earlier era, capital and labor faced each other in a situation where trade unions were speaking very powerfully for labor, but in a situation where capital was to some extent accountable to labor and to the state. We now have a situation where capital is no longer accountable. The violation of labor rights which are happening within the organized sector, for example in garments, for example in any other sector where work has been informalized, this denial of labor rights is happening with the full knowledge and acknowledgement of the state. It's not like the state doesn't know, but the state in most cases turns a blind eye to the violation of labor rights, and through the new labor codes and whatever new labor laws are coming up, you can very easily see that individual states or the central government are not particularly keen to protect labor rights, as we have known in terms of a minimum wage, fixed to cost of living, in terms of social insurance, paid holidays, so on and so forth. All of these are being violated by the state itself. So in that situation, where both capital and labor are, in a sense confronting, both capital and the state are in a sense confronting labor in an antagonistic posture, the position of trade unions is highly compromised and highly challenged, because the dilemma, of course, is to whether to negotiate for, small gains, like a small gain in minimum wage, or where labor rights are being violated in terms of, coercion or hardships in the shop floor. Is that the choice, or should trade unions speak to larger issues like, the unbridled growth of capital and their very arrogant violation of labor rights? And what does that speak to? That it speaks to a particular model of development which we have adopted through economic liberalization. So within this very much, broader context of a shift in the political economy, which has shifted the power of capital and state against labor, I mean, that's the context in which I at least would explain the sort of the deceleration of trade unions, right? But thank you for the question. People don't ask these questions anymore. We don't get a chance to discuss these. So thank you very much. But so coming to the skill in India policy, yeah, so that actually was a really interesting study that we did, that young men and women who come to the city and who are actually brought to this city by these skilling training centers, given the training and then they can't cope up with urban jobs or urban lives, they go back and they then take up jobs which they would have found anyway without the skilling. So it's a question of high expectations, a process of complete frustration, and then going back to the same kind of jobs. For example, in construction, for example, in industry, for example, just roaming around in the village, not doing much, and finally, joining agriculture in some capacity or another, taking advantage of NREGS where it's available, so on and so forth. But the aspiration remains tied to, let me make some money in the city and go back. I want to help my parents, I want to buy more land, I want to buy a two-wheeler, I want to do this, I want to do that. So the aspiration also very realistically is to return to the village where life seems much easier and the cost of living is so much less. But that is the bridge that they're not able to cross. They're not able to stay put in the city enough to make, enough to make some money to be able to go back and achieve that higher standard of life in the villages. So yeah, I mean, we studied Bangalore and Raichur is, of course, as would you know, one of the most backward regions. So I don't know what we would have found if we had studied maybe Mangalore or Mysore, where there are more opportunities for returnees. But we were definitely looking at a rural economic context which provides no opportunities at all. Thank you.
Okay. So we were actually supposed to end 20-25 minutes before this, but I think you will all agree that we wanted to continue and listen to this discussion. So, but I think maybe we can end this session now. And I just want to end by thanking both of our speakers. One thing that really struck me was both of you talked about the macro and the micro, and how things like policies at the global level can sometimes affect things at such a local level, and what is one to do about it. But I think one thing we have done here, and one thing that will continue to be important, is that there should be space for ideas, and there should be space for these ideas to be discussed openly. And so thank you to both of you for your presentations. Thank you to all of you for coming here. One thing, since you gave me unnecessary credit, I would say that I want to particularly thank Yashodhara, who was instrumental in connecting me to you. And I'm nobody to thank. I know the people at the institute who make these events. I know they don't want their names taken, but I will say that even as I consider myself part of this institute, I'm very grateful to have this space in this city where we can have discussions of this kind. So with that, I think we can end our session today. Thank you.